It's okay. With the first slide.
Yes,
Yeah.
sir.
You can start now.
Okay, sir. So I'll try to cover as much as possible because it's a very vast topic. So basically, the kidneys, we will be having 25% of cardiac output to our kidneys, and the function unit of each kidney is a nephron. We have around 1 million nephrons in each kidney, and the cortex contains 85% of the nephrons, and the medulla contains 15% of the nephrons. And so going into individual nephron, so we have three key functions of the nephron. That is glomerular filtration. So basically from the arterioles and the glomerular capillaries, the water and solutes are filtered by them into the renal tubule. Then next is a tubular reabsorption. That is water, glucose and amino acids which are inside the renal tubule are reabsorbed into the capillary blood. And thirdly, tubular secretion. So secretion is mainly from the peritubular capillaries into the tubular secretions. That is how they form the urinaries, H plus, K plus, and creatinine and other drugs. So these are the basic functions. That is glomerular filtration, tubular reabsorption, and tubular secretion. So basically, the fluid balance is maintained through ultrafiltration and reabsorption, while electrolyte and acid-base balance is maintained through reabsorption, that is tubular reabsorption, and tubular excretion, that is tubular secretion. And excretion of drugs and byproducts of metabolism is by tubular secretion, that is nitrogen, urea, creatinine. And there are other functions like synthesis of erythropoietin, regulation of blood pressure, maintaining calcium and phosphorus balance. These are the basic renal functions. But when there is damage in these areas, it causes accumulation of waste products. The waste products like metabolic and acid base and electrolyte disturbances. There will be a risk of fluid overload, and subsequently the acute renal failure may affect other organs also. So this is a situation in which you need to think of starting renal replacement therapy. There are different modes, we'll come to it. So this is basically how you classify acute kidney injury. I'm not going into fine details. Basically you have two criteria, that is pediatric rifle criteria, that is risk, injury, failure, loss, and end-stage renal disease. And there is Akin criteria. There is Akin 1, 2, 3. So both of these you have to calculate mainly the estimated creatinine clearance. That is K into height in centimeter by serum creatinine. That's K is 0.43, and height in centimeter divided by serum creatinine. That is the estimated creatinine clearance. So and once you go to the acute renal failure, you have three phases of acute renal failure. That is the oliguric phase, that is initially. Then there is a diuretic phase. Then there is a recovery phase. In the oliguric phase, the urine output is very poor. There will be rapid electrolyte disturbances. There will be acid-base disturbances. There will be increased fluid overload and the various effects due to the fluid overload. Next, it comes to the diuretic phase. Here the urine output will be good, but it will be a poor quality urine. That is, still we will be having the electrolyte disturbances. Still we will be having the acid-base disturbances. Then gradually it can come to the recovery phase. So in the recovery phase, again the urine will be good quality, recovery of azotemia, everything happens in the recovery phase. So basically you need to look at the oliguric phase and diuretic phase. These are the scenarios which we need to think of starting RRT, that is renal replacement therapy. Before starting RRT, any case of AK, always think of going for non-dialytic management. That is, you restrict the fluids to insensible water loss and urine output for the last 24 hours. Maintain renal perfusion. Treat hypertension if there is hypertension. You should maintain strict input-output charting. Address electrolyte abnormality if any. Watch for fluid overload status. Then the indications of renal replacement therapy. Indications of RRT, mainly indication is acute kidney injury, either with fluid overload. If we have severe fluid overload, refractive diuretics. If there is hyperkalemia, potassium more than 6.5, severe metabolic acidosis, that is pH less than 7.1, rapidly climbing urea creatinine. If there is symptomatic uremia like encephalopathy, uremic encephalopathy, pericarditis, bleeding, nausea, pruritus, if any persistent oliguria or anuria, then there are other indications like drugs and toxin injections, which are water soluble and not highly protein bound. Refractory symptomatic altered abnormalities like tumor lysis syndrome. Right now, we have a case in our ICU. This child came with a total leukocyte count of 2 lakh. So this child is prone for severe tumor lysis syndrome. So if you are not able to flush out the kidney by giving diuretic and high volume fluid, you may have to think of RRT at this point. Then in severe sepsis. Then there are different RRT modalities. You have intermittent therapy and continuous therapy. Intermittent is less than 24 hours. You do for a brief sessions. That is by IH, that is intermittent hemodialysis, or SLED, that is sustained low efficiency dialysis. Then there is continuous, that is you give more than 24 hours. In this, there comes the PD, that is peritoneal dialysis. Then the broad spectrum of CRRT, that is continuous renal replacement therapy, again divided into SCUF, slow continuous ultrafiltration, CVVH, continuous vena-venous hemofiltration, CVVHD, that is continuous vena-venous hemodialysis, and CVVHDF, that is continuous vena-venous hemodiafiltration. We'll come to each one slowly. So which RRT you should be using for each child? So it varies with age of the child, size of the child, what is the indication, what are the settings in which you are doing RRT, how is the vascular access, how is the availability of the vascular access, how is the clinical state of the child, is the child hemodynamically stable, what is the neurological condition, is there a risk of bleeding tendency, whether you have the subsequent good amount of expertise available for doing RRT. Before going into each type, we'll go deeply into the physiology of renal replacement therapy or dialysis. So basic physiology is diffusion. Diffusion is nothing but the solutes move from an area of high concentration to area of low concentration. You have a lot of solutes on one side, that is in the blood. You have a semi-permeable membrane. On the other side, you have the dialysis fluid. So the solute moves from higher concentration, that is in the blood, through the semi-permeable membrane into the dialysis fluid. That is diffusion. So it keeps on moving till you reach a point of saturation of concentrations. So it is limited by the permeability characteristics of the membrane. That is, what is the type of membrane. Then what is the charge and molecular weight of solute? If you have a low molecular weight solute, that is ideal for diffusion. Then comes ultrafiltration. Ultrafiltration is nothing but, it's not the solute which is moving, but the solvent, that is the water or the solution which is moving. You have, again, think of two containers. One container is the blood. You have a semi-permeable membrane. The other container is the dialysis fluid. So at the site of the blood, you give lot of pressure, and you have small pores in the semi-permeable membrane. With the high pressure, the solution keeps on moving from the blood to the dialysis fluid. This is called ultrafiltration. So it depends on the osmotic gradient or pressure gradient across the membrane. So this pressure is called transmembrane pressure. So this is again the same which I told, ultrafiltration. You have the blood, you have a pressure difference, you give higher pressure, and through the small pores, the solution start moving from the blood to the dialysis fluid. This is ultrafiltration. So what are the factors which affects ultrafiltration? If you have a high blood flow rate, there will be increased ultrafiltration. If you have negative pressure on the dialysis fluid area, that is ultrafiltrated compartment, again you have more of ultrafiltrate coming through the small pores. If you have decreased oncotic pressure of plasma, that is if you have very dilute fluid, it is very easy for the fluid to go from the blood compartment to the dialysis fluid. That is if you have a decreased oncotic pressure. This is a principle which is used in CRRT, where you give lot of fluid to the through the blood, dilute the blood, so it will pass very easily through the small pores. And again, and also the transmembrane pressure across the filter. So basically diffusion, it's a concentration gradient between the solutes between the two area. It depends on the pore size. Mainly we do diffusion in HD, PD and CBV HD. Then comes ultrafiltration. It is driven by hydrostatic pressure. It is mainly for fluid removal, not for solute removal. It has only very limited solute removal. So how is the solute removed in ultrafiltration? It is by convection. That is when the solution, that is the water or the solution move from the blood area to the dialysis fluid area, it takes or it drags a minimal solvent, or it drags a minimal solute along with it. That is called solvent drag. This method is called convection. So along with the ultrafiltrate, a small volume of solute is dragged along with it. So the convection dips on many aspects. That is the amount of fluid that moves from each compartment. What is the size and concentration of the solute? So basically, if you have a high molecular weight or large molecular weight solute, it is more effective in removing by ultrafiltration. So basically, you have different molecules, and the small molecules in that diffusion is better than convection. If you have middle molecules, that is uric acid, glucose, albumin, vitamin B12, etc., that is convection is better than diffusion. But if you have a large molecule like beta-2, microglobulin, inulin, etc., so that is removed mainly by convection. So just briefly into each type, that is peritoneal dialysis. So what is the type of principle for peritoneal dialysis? It is basically convection and diffusion. Diffusion both and convection both are there. So what are the pros of peritoneal dialysis? It is very simple. It is cost effective. There is only gentle solute clearance. There is no need of any anticoagulation. The hemodynamics are stable. No need for any vascular access. But there are some few cons for peritoneal dialysis. There is only slow clearance of solute. There is uncontrolled ultrafiltrate. We don't know how much ultrafiltrate is going to come in the peritoneal dialysis. There is risk of infection because you're doing an invasive procedure in the peritoneum. It can compromise respiratory function because you are infusing large amount of fluid into the peritoneal cavity. So if somebody who is already having ascites or compromised respiratory function, there will be difficulty in movement of the diaphragm. And not effective in shock states. Why? Because in shock states there is no sufficient blood reaching the capillaries. Probably so that's it may not be sufficient in shock states. Then intermittent hemodialysis or classical hemodialysis. So main principle of intermittent hemodialysis by diffusion. So it is mainly useful for removing small molecular weight molecules. So what are the pros? This rapid and effective solute clearance happens by hemodialysis. It technically is very simple and it is very less costly than CRRT. The cons, that is you are removing large amount of fluid at a single time. So there is risk of hemodynamic instability. You need a good vascular access and need for anticoagulation. You may not achieve desired fluid balance. Why? Because you are not removing the fluid. You are doing only the diffusion. That is solutes mainly, more than any solvent. Then there is continuous renal replacement therapy. Again, two mechanisms like PD, diffusion and convection. Pros, it is hemodynamically very stable. There is low and continuous removal of uremic toxins. This is basically a hemodialysis machine which is going to run for 24 hours, 36 hours, 48 hours continuously. So hemodynamically very stable and low and continuous removal of uremic toxins. There is controlled ultrafiltration. You can adjust how much ultrafiltration can happen in each hour. Mainly the middle molecules and cytokines are removed. Cons are, it's technically challenging, need vascular access and anticoagulation, and it's very costly and need expertise. So going into a little more details about hemodialysis, what I have told this early, like basically it follows three principles. That is diffusion, ultrafiltration, convection, but in hemodialysis we are using mainly of diffusion. So again, the indications for HD is the same as acute kidney injury, but something different is like in patients who are not able to do PD, or in cases where PD has failed. There are some relative contraindications for HD. If you have hemodynamic instability, if you are having difficult vascular access, if there is risk of severe bleeding because you need to do anticoagulation, and in premature infants who are too small. So basically, as you can see here, the blood is taken by a blood tubing pump into the blood part of the dialyzer. You have a semipermeable membrane, and then there is a dialysis fluid. The fluid runs inside the dialysis fluid in this direction by a proportioning pump. That is a dialysis fluid pump. And after removing the solutes into the dialysis fluid, it goes out to the drain, and the blood goes back to the patient's body. So basically, you need this is a dialysis prescription. You need a vascular access. You need to select what is the dialyzer which you need to use, which is the type of tubing you need to use, what is the blood flow rate, because you have blood on one side and dialyzer on the other side. You need to decide how much is the blood flow rate, how much is the dialysate flow rate, how much clearance you are aiming, how much fluid you need to remove, what is the dialysate composition, how much anticoagulation, and treatment time. The vascular access for each age there is different catheters available, and always use ultrasound guided HD catheter insertion. Right internal jugular vein is preferred more than femoral, more than left IJVL, more than subclavian. Always remember to do an immediate chest X-ray for positioning after IJV and subclavian. Then comes to dialyzer. This is the dialyzer filter. As you can see, it has lot of hollow capillary fibers, which is immersed in the dialysis fluid. And there are different sizes, that is F3, F4, F5. There are different size based on the body surface area. For a child less than 12 kg, you need to do F3. 12 to 20 kg, dialyzer size is F4. And 20 to 30 kg, dialyzer size is F5. Then equipments, you have, this is the arterial and venous tubings. Usually the volume of circuit should be 8 to 10% of the total body volume. That is 80 ml per kg is total body volume. If you have a 10 kg child, you should having a 80 ml tubing. If you need to have a tubing is bigger than that, if it is more than 10% of the estimated body weight, you need to prime the circuit either with albumin or usually prime with saline. You can prime either with albumin or blood. And the blood flow rate for dialysis, simple hemodialysis, 4 to 8 ml per kg per minute, and you can go up to 10 ml per kg per minute. If you increase the blood flow rate, it increases the efficiency of the dialysis. That is, it increases the solute clearance. Then dialysate flow rate, that is, you have 300, 500, and 800. So if the clearance is inadequate, again you can increase the dialysate flow rate from 300 to 500 to 800. Usually in adults they use 800. Pediatric we use around 300 to 500. Then clearance mainly by diffusion and a small part by convection. And the amount of fluid to be removed, that it varies by case to case. Usually normal hemodialysis is not used so much for fluid removal, but usually we start with around 10 ml per kg per hour and gradually increase. Then you have concurrent flow, that this is the flow inside the blood and dialysis fluid. That is concurrent flow and dialysis fluid flow. And countercurrent. Concurrent is like you're going into same direction. So if you have a concentration difference, it reaches the saturation by around the middle of the tube. That is concurrent. In this, there is no rapid exchange of solute does not happen. It only exchanges very smoothly. Suppose if you want to increase the solute clearance rapidly, then you put countercurrent. That is, the flows in two directions, countercurrent directions. In one direction blood flow, in the other direction is the dialysate fluid flows. So there is rapid removal in countercurrent. Then anticoagulation, it is very important for hemodialysis because you don't want the filter to be clotted. So you always use anticoagulation. Use a bolus dose of 15 to 20 units per kg of heparin and give continuous infusion of 15 to 20 units per kg per hour. So then there is a dialysate composition. Basically, they maintain a sodium of 130 to 145, potassium of 1 to 3, calcium 1.25 to 1.75, magnesium 0.5, alkaline buffers mainly, and glucose of 100 to 120. And there are different models how we measure the adequacy of the dialysis. That is my urea kinetic model. That is how much urea is cleared. What is the pre-dialysis burn and post-dialysis burn. But the model which we use currently for calculating the efficiency of the dialysis is by KT by V. So I'm not going into deep of that. And usually treatment time is 4 hours. And if you want to remove a lot of fluid, you with less risk of intradialytic hypertension, increase the timing of the dialysis. And always make sure there is infection control practices are followed. HT is a very sterile process. Always do sterile insertion of catheter. Catheters should not be used for anything else like any infusions or blood sampling. Focus on patient and staff precautions and hygiene. Then there are complications which can happen in dialysis. That is intradialytic hypotension. That hypotension is happening during the process of dialysis. Muscle cramps. Then most importantly, dialysis disequilibrium syndrome. Then other risks like seizures, catheter-related bloodstream infection, bleeding, catheter malfunction, or clotting. So what is intradialytic hypertension? During the process of dialysis, if the systolic BP drops more than 20 millimeter or the decrease in mean arterial pressure of 10 millimeter, it is called intradialytic hypertension. So it can cause arrhythmias, all those things. And how do you prevent intradialytic instability? Always rule out other causes of hypertension and make sure there is no infection. Make sure the dialysis prescription is accurate. Make sure you are not removing too much of ultrafiltrate. And always remember, avoid antihypertensive medicines on if you are dealing with a patient with some chronic dialysis. Always remember, avoid hypertensive medications on dialysis day, but may not be applicable in acute setting. But in chronic setting, you need to think of stopping antihypertensive. And this is very important. That is disequilibrium syndrome. So basically, when you are removing urea from the ECF and intravascular compartment, there is already a large amount of urea in a uremic patients inside the brain. So when you are removing the urea, there is rapid movement of water from the extracellular fluid into the intracellular fluid. So this causes cerebral edema. So basically, if you are dealing with a pediatric case and when you're starting the first dialysis, do it very slowly. Because if you're having a urea of 150, 160, and rapidly if you are correcting urea, there is high risk of dialysis disequilibrium and cerebral edema. So usually it is self-limited. You need to stop the HT immediately. If seizure occurs, treat by glucose, diazepam, phenytoin, etc. You can try mannitol 3% saline. And mainly you need to anticipate dialysis disequilibrium and prevent it. You can use a smaller dialyser membrane, that is F3 or F4, and by decreasing the blood flow rate and do the first day do only slow dialysis. And always remember, when you're doing dialysis, there are medications which are giving antibiotics, so everything will be removed during the process of dialysis. And always follow the specific chart with the dosing for the kidney injury as well as the dialysis. Then a small word about SLED. It's a hybrid form of renal replacement therapy. That is basically it's a hemodialysis machine only, but you are giving the dialysis for a longer time with a low flow rate. That is sustained low efficiency dialysis. So instead of 1 to 2 hours, we extend the session to 4 to 6 hours. So usually SLED is more than 6 hours, but less than 24 hours. So the machine, you decrease the blood flow rate and also decrease the dialysis flow rate. The blood flow rate in SLED is usually, other one is 4 to 8, you can go up to 10. In this is only 3 to 5 ml per kg per minute. And dialysis flow rate is decreased to 100 to 300 ml per minute. So basically, they have studied SLED compared to CRRT because CRRT is a very costly equipment. People have found out that even the SLED, that is the usual hemodialysis, if you prolong for a longer time with a low blood flow rate, with good amount of anticoagulation and less amount of dialysis flow, it is almost equal to continuous renal replacement therapy. Then a small word, we are going a little bit about CRRT. As you can see, this is a CRRT machine. So a lot of pumps are there. Basically, you have a lot of pumps. It's a bit complicated. We need good expertise for using CRRT. These are the different pumps which you will be facing. That is a blood pump, one which we usually start at 2 to 10 ml per kg per minute. Then there is a dialysis pump that it is usually 10 to 40 ml per meter per square meter. And then there is a pre-blood pump that is for mainly for anticoagulation. Then there is replacement fluid pump, mainly for delivery of replacement fluid. And there is effluent pump, that is mainly the pump used for removing the fluid from the dialysis. I'll explain it individually. So this is CVV-HD, that is continuous vena-venous hemodialysis. As you can see, from the patient, the blood is going into the filter. Blood is going from this direction to this direction. You have the dialysate fluid, which is going from the opposite direction. And then the waste, that is the effluent, is collected by the effluent pump into the drain. So you have 3 pumps in CVV-HD. We use mainly 3 pumps. That is a blood pump for taking in the blood from the patient. Then it goes into the filter. From the other side of the filter, you have the dialysis pump pumping in the dialysate fluid. And again, there is effluent pump. That is the waste pump, which is going to remove the all the solute move from the blood into the dialysis fluid, and it is removed by the effluent pump. This is basically CVV-HD. That is continuous vena-venous hemodialysis. So basically, it is diffusion. Mainly, you are removing only solute, not fluid. And there is no replacement fluid. The blood flow rate is 2 to 10 ml per kg per minute. And the dialysis fluid rate is 20 to 35 ml per kg per hour. If you want to improve the dialysis clearance, increase the dialysis flow rate. Then there is CVVH, that is continuous vena-venous hemofiltration. Hemofiltration means mainly the fluid is removed. In this, you have again the blood pump taking the blood from the patient into the filter. Then you have something called replacement pump. We had told previously, how do you increase the ultrafiltration? You dilute the blood. So when you're diluting the blood, it increases the ultrafiltration. So how do you dilute the blood? You add extra fluid to the blood which is going inside the dialysis filter. So that is called replacement fluid. So either you can ask pre-filter or post-filter. Both way you can increase the decrease the oncotic pressure and dilute the blood and improve the efficiency of the ultrafiltration. So again, you have here the blood pump for taking in, the replacement pump for to taking inside the replacement fluid, and then there is a effluent pump. That is the pump for taking out the collected solvent, that is water. It is mainly for fluid removal, and along with it, there may be some amount of solute may be removed because it something that's we are told earlier, that is called convection. The replacement, there is only replacement fluid. There is no need of any dialysate fluid. Then almost something like SCUF. I'm not going into that. Then CVV-HDF, that is continuous vena-venous hemodiafiltration. So in this, there is all 3 are there. That is diffusion, convection, and ultrafiltration. It's a mixture of both CVV-H and CVV-HD. And so again, you have the blood pump for taking in the blood. Then you have the dialysate pump for taking in the dialysate fluid. And again, you have replacement pump. So all 3 are there. That is diffusion is happening, convection is happening, and ultrafiltration is happening. So it is needed for mainly solute removal as well as fluid removal. That is CVV-HDF. So solute clearance in various modalities. So if you want to remove more of solute, you do CVVHD, that is diffusion. If you want to remove more of fluid, you do CVVH, that is only ultrafiltration. If you want to do both, do CVVHDF, which is the one which is mostly preferred in all units. Then going into, we have finished the hemodialysis and CRRT. We are going into peritoneal dialysis. So again, principle is same. You have blood on one side, you have a semi-permeable membrane, and you have the dialysis fluid. But there is a difference in peritoneal dialysis. The membrane is our peritoneal membrane. It is the oldest, simplest, cheapest mode of dialysis. You have blood in the peritoneal capillaries on one side and dialysis solution. You infuse lot of dialysis. There is a specific amount of dialysis fluid which are infusing into the peritoneal cavity. And you have the semi-permeable membrane. So from the blood, the solute move to the peritoneal cavity and the through the semi-permeable membrane. So, and you remove the fluid from the peritoneal cavity. So your peritoneal membrane is the dialyzer and through the capillaries. So basically through the dialysis membrane, it has three types of pores. That is ultra small pores through which only water is cleared. There is small pores which clears urea, creatinine and glucose water, and large pores through which proteins and macromolecules are coming out. So again, the same process of transport like in our usual dialysis. One is diffusion, other one is ultrafiltration, then convection, and there is one more extra, that is absorption. We'll come to each. Diffusion, again same thing. You have a concentration gradient. So inside the capillaries, if you have a high concentration of solute, and in the peritoneal cavity, in the peritoneal or the PD fluid, if the concentration is low, the solute move from high concentration to low concentration till the saturation occurs. This is mainly for low molecular weight substances like urea more than creatinine. Usually low molecular weight urea is cleared very easily. Then ultrafiltration. Again, we told in dialysis we have a pressure difference between two areas. That is the pressure difference between the blood area and the dialysis fluid area. Because of the pressure difference, the solvent, that is the solution, moves from the high pressure to low pressure. So here the pressure difference is between the capillary pressure, which has a pressure of 20 millimeters, to the intraperitoneal pressure, which is 7 millimeter. This we can alter by changing the osmotic gradient by increasing the tonicity of the PD fluid. Increasing or decreasing the tonicity of the PD fluid. Then convection. It's the same mechanism which we told earlier. Along with the ultrafiltration, it takes amount of solute, but this is called solvent drag. Then there is something called absorption. That is, it is against the, like you have diffusion from the capillaries into the peritoneal cavity. So absorption happens from the peritoneal cavity into the capillaries. So what are the indications for peritoneal dialysis? Mainly in case of fluid overload or pulmonary edema, refractory to diuretic therapy, like our usual dialysis. If you have persistent hyperkalemia, if there is severe metabolic acidosis, unresponsive to medical management, if there is neurological symptoms of uremia like altered mental status, seizures, severe metabolic acidosis with hypernatremia. Then the pros, again telling one more time about the pros of peritoneal dialysis. That is, you need only minimal equipment. It is very cost effective. Less training is needed, can be done even in small infants. There is no hemodynamic side effect. It is more physiological. No need of any vascular access. No need of any anticoagulation. But there are some cons, like it is very slow and less efficient. If you want to remove a lot of urea immediately, your PD may not be effective. You have unreliable and variable ultrafiltration. The ultrafiltration between the capillary pressure of 20 and the peritoneal pressure of 7. So you don't know how much ultrafiltrate is going to come in each time. There is risk of peritonitis and respiratory compromise. So this is a slide which is going to tell which mode to be used for each. Suppose you have a deteriorating hemodynamics and you need an increased need for fluid removal. Then you do the CRRT for intermittent hemodialysis. And suppose if the hemodynamics are stable and if you need to stable, you need to remove the solute very fastly. You do IH, that is intermittent hemodialysis. And suppose the hemodynamics are not stable, you think of doing PD. PD if the hemodynamics are stable, and if the hemodynamics are not stable, think of doing CRRT, that is continuous renal replacement therapy. So I'm not going into depth of how to do PD, which again requires 45-minute session. So this is the part which I want to emphasize in renal replacement therapy. That is the mainly fundamental is the physiology. That is by diffusion, ultrafiltration, and convection. So if you apply the principle in each type, hemodialysis, CRRT, and peritoneal dialysis, it's very easy. So that's all about renal replacement therapy. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for the class. If any one of you have any doubts, you can unmute yourself and ask questions, or you can post it in the chat box.
So when to stop the last, the gun is taking it and you have to consider when to stop the last one.
Okay, one of the questions asked by Dr. Mujib is like when to stop the, because child will be on antihypertensive medications usually. So when to stop the antihypertensive medications. So basically there is no specific guidelines for when to stop. Usually in patients, like mainly in adults, they use this thing like if you are on chronic antihypertensive medications and if you are on long-term dialysis, that day you stop the antihypertensive medications. But in children, mainly we deal mainly with acute dialysis. So in this scenario, you need to go case by case. If you're having very much of hypertensive issues, you can skip the antihypertensive just before the procedure, and then you can monitor the what is the hyper, because once you do the procedure of dialysis, what are the antihypertensives which you would have given, it would have been dialysed out. So you may have to give again dose of, if you're on refractory hypertension, you may have to again repeat the dose of antihypertensive one by one. So there is no specific guideline for that. You need to manage case by case.
So one question is there. Is routine antibiotic indicated prior to initiating dialysis?
There is no specific role for routine antibiotics for dialysis, but usually people tend to put a minimum amount of antibiotic for the catheter if you're using a very short-term dialysis catheter. There is no need of any long-term antibiotic if you think just for the sake of dialysis. Because people are on sometimes people on permacath and other catheters which can be used for a long time, so they are not usually put on any antibiotics.
Sir, any more questions from the crowd seated in the hall? Sir, one more question. What would be RRT of choice in neonates with severe hyperammonemia?
Basically, if you have the facility of CRRT and with a neonatal circuit, then continuous renal replacement therapy is the ideal. But usually we end up doing only peritoneal dialysis for this child because of the lack of expertise and the cost required in cost for doing the CRRT. You cannot do the conventional hemodialysis or SLUD for neonates because there is no circuits available for that.
One more question. Do we stop anti-hyperkalemic measures prior to dialysis? I repeat, do we stop anti-hyperkalemic measures prior to dialysis?
Because the process of your dialysis itself, your whatever the potassium will be corrected. There is no specific guidelines that you need to stop. I'm not sure exactly, but basically you don't stop anti-hyperkalemic medications. You wait for you do the dialysis and check the potassium again, and based on that you go ahead.
If there are no more questions, we can wind up the session. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.